Should men have a say in women's femininity or how they show up as feminine women in their relationships? I have a special guest, a male guest today, and we're going to talk all about femininity, relationships, sensuality versus sexuality, and everything that you want to know about a male's perspective. Stay tuned. Welcome to the secret formula of femininity for women who want to live a more feminine, fun, and fabulous life. I'm Dr. Nicole Montero, your host on this weekly journey to unlocking your inner radiance, nurturing fulfilling relationships, and becoming the best version of yourself. Welcome, everybody, back to the secret formula of femininity. I'm your host, Dr. Nicole, and your guide on this journey to tapping into your feminine essence. I have been waiting for this episode. I have a special guest, actually, my first male guest, and I've been trying to get him on the podcast. Author, historian, he's a sex educator and expert on relationship dynamics, what men think, women and men's interactions and relationships. Brother Habeeb Akande, I am so happy to have you here. Welcome to the secret formula of femininity.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Nicole. It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes. So there's so many topics. Look, I have my papers here, so many questions, but I know the conversation is just going to flow. And if you don't already follow his platform, he's an author of several books. We're going to get into that. But just follow him on Instagram. What is your IG again? It's
Habib underscore Akande. So Habib with two E's, HABEEB underscore AKANDE.
okay. So I just want to get that out the way because you have to follow his platform to understand this man is not shy about pushing the envelope and really getting us to think about different aspects of relationship dynamics, male female dynamics, femininity, masculinity, sexuality, sensuality. The other thing, I don't know if you've heard that there's something called the pleasure gap. So there is a gap in terms of sexual and sensual pleasure and fulfillment between men and women. And this is one thing that Habib addresses in his books and his lectures and in his work. And so we were chatting before we started the recording and just thinking about like there's so many topics to talk about. But I'm first interested in what made you interested in exploring this work. You talk a lot about female sexuality, sensuality. You really actually uplift and support women in through your work. And I know a lot of people have different opinions about that, especially from an Islamic perspective, but even from a secular perspective. But what got you into this? Why are you doing this? What's the story behind that?
It's a tough question because for me it's normal. And what I mean by it's normal is that as a man, as a heterosexual man, why wouldn't I be interested in understanding women and understanding how to pleasure women? I think this is
Mm-hmm.
something that, for whatever reason, across many cultures, across many religious faith communities, it's a taboo topic. And I was always baffled in terms of why that is, because obviously, from an Islamic perspective, I'm a Muslim. That the religion of Islam has a very rich tradition of Muslim scholars dating back to the beginning of Islam, writing books about intimacy, sex manuals, teaching men about the importance of ensuring that their wife is sexually satisfied, both physically as well as emotionally. Unfortunately, in the last couple of hundred years, it's been seen as a very taboo topic for various reasons. But from the Islamic perspective, it's completely normal. From a cultural perspective, I'm born and raised in the UK, but of Nigerian Yoruba descent. And culturally speaking, it's very normal and common for men to, again, some men take it to an extreme in the sense of maybe being womanized and mistreating women, which again is not something I advocate for. But in terms of understanding a woman's perspective and interacting with women and empowering women, that's something that is just normal to me. So when people often ask me that question, I'm quite intrigued, as in, why would I not want to talk about
Mm-hmm.
this?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
like this, why wouldn't I not be interested? And especially where I've noticed, again, like I've mentioned, across many cultures, unfortunately, where women are often marginalized and their voices are often silenced. if anything, because I used in my first couple of books, I was writing about race and the contributions of Black people, because oftentimes they were somewhat disregarded. And someone put it to me that why is it you speak so much about Blackness and the contributions of Black people, but you don't speak about women and how they're marginalized in both many Muslim and African societies. And me being a man and having a blind spot, I was aware of it, but I wasn't as aware of it. So I had
Mm-hmm.
to really
Mm-hmm.
reflect and think, okay, the same way I was complaining and asking for non-Black people to help empower Black people, as a man, as a person that's obviously in a place of privilege and have access to a number of these texts, and someone who's quite an inquisitive person anyway, why don't I start actually looking more into this issue and giving, and again, it's not for me to say this is how women should behave, but it's giving examples of, competent, qualified women who can speak on such subjects, as well as giving different models of femininity and womanhood, both within the Islamic tradition, but also within different African cultures. Because I think oftentimes people wait for validation from men, and I don't think that's not how I was raised. I could
Mm-hmm.
listen to a woman just as much as listen and take and extract the jewels and the gems from the speaker, irrespective of their gender. But I've noticed that a number of people, even if a woman is saying jewels or saying something that's really, important, they're waiting for the man to validate what that woman said. It's like, okay, when the man said it, now that's true, and that's problematic, and that's not the culture I was raised in. So I've never really had that. I've never really understood why my work is considered to be somewhat different, because to me it's normal, but it's not common. So for me, it's just,
Yeah.
I mean, again, of how I was raised, but and like I said, because I see there is a gap where we don't hear many public voices of competent, qualified women, then it's to try and amplify those voices. And also for men, because a lot of men are struggling in silence. I know we
Mm-hmm.
are going to focusing about women, but a lot of men struggle to communicate or understand women. And I think oftentimes it's because they haven't had healthy relationships with women, because the relationships they've had, is, except from obviously from family members, it's either been purely for sexual recreational purposes or
Mm-hmm.
procreational purposes. But in terms
Mm.
of healthy, intimate relation with a woman you're not romantically involved in, sometimes I think that's important, because then you can appreciate and respect the woman for who she is, and her mind. But I think oftentimes, especially some people that come from very conservative cultures or religious cultures, they have this idea that I can't speak to a woman because it's going to be sexual, and that's more of a problem on the man not being able to control his lust or control his desires. And then people would use religion or misuse religion to kind of justify their warped behavior, kind of thing. And that's why, so with my work, it's also trying to present other examples where you had healthy male female interaction, and you also had healthy male scholars and female scholars who are learning from one another and
Mm.
collaborating with one another. We both have different insights. We have blind spots as well. I have many blind spots, obviously being a man, being of Nigerian descent. So there's certain things that I naturally wouldn't understand. So I like to learn and study, and from people from different cultures and ethnic backgrounds. And likewise, I'm sure that I've got some insights that maybe some women are interested in, because
Mm-hmm.
a man, and secondly because as men, when we get together, there are a number of things that we say behind the scenes that we would not say in public. Some of those things are, I'm not going to lie, probably toxic, and I myself do part of that sometimes. I'm not going to, myself out to be some type of angel. I think it's healthy and important for people to hear both sides in terms of understanding the way we think about certain topics, especially in relation to femininity and interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, wow, you said so much. I think one thing that stood out to me and I'm really curious about is how you were raised because such a level of self-awareness and respect for like equality, but not equality like we're the same, but equal value. And I think that's a huge concept in Islam that people don't understand. Men and women are equally valued, but we're different. And I will say you really uplift women on your platform, but not in a pandering like patronizing way, like, oh, I know I need to uplift women. But it's really sincere. Like, you highlight the work of women and value their contributions. And I think that really comes across. So, tell us a little bit about your upbringing and your cultural background because kind of what I'm hearing is that we tend to have this view in the West, like that the West is so advanced when it comes to men and women and relationships, and other traditions are oppressive. And you're kind of flipping the script because you're like, first of all, my Nigerian background and culture, this is normal to value, normal healthy sexuality. So tell us a little bit about like that perspective and just how you came to this way of seeing things.
Yeah, so I have to give a lot of credit to my parents. I didn't appreciate the values that they were instilling in me probably until my mid to late 20s. I'm in my 40s now, but so I was raised. My dad's Muslim. My mum was a Christian. She embraced Islam. I think when I was young, I think like 3 or 4. But my parents weren't very strict in terms of from a religious perspective, and I wasn't really interested in religion growing up. I went to the mosque, because I had to, or else I'll get beaten. But then I also went to the church on Sundays, my aunt's church now and again when I would visit them. And I enjoyed going to the church more than going to the mosque, if I'm honest with you, just because the mosque, I was told to, read a book in a language I never understood, got beaten if I wasn't able to memorize something. So I was always very fear orientated. Everyone looked quite angry and grumpy. And then in the church, people are laughing, singing, dancing. So my experience was in the church was, but I just couldn't get around the concept of worshiping a man. That's why I never looked to
Embrace
embrace
Christian. Uh-huh.
Christianity. But even when I was like in my formative years in school, I would say when people ask me like, "What's my religion?" Sometimes I would say I'm half Muslim, half Christian, just because I
Mm.
was proud of my Islamic faith and I didn't really understand it somewhat. But one of the things that my parents, especially my dad, instilled in me in terms of how to be a man was by your actions. He wasn't someone who used to talk a lot. He didn't. He is not very knowledgeable in terms of from a religious perspective, in terms of understanding, like memorizing the Quran or knowing all of the rules. But he was a man of principle, and he always used to talk about like your reputation. Your reputation is the most important thing. And I learned from him by osmosis by how he treated people. He had a number of women in the community that he helped with. So again, but he wasn't a womanizer. And when I was younger, I wanted to, when you're young and dumb, and I wanted to mess around, and I indulged a little bit. And I was saying, yeah, when I'm young, when I get old, I'm gonna have like 3 or 4 wives. And he used to say to me, "So you're stupid. You don't know anything," because he was raised in a polygamous household and he saw the infighting between the co-wives and the children, and he said he never wants to put his children through that or his wives through that. So even though he was offered, and that's also one of the problematic things sometimes that can happen because he's someone that is respected in the community, both in the UK and in Nigeria. People would say, you should marry a second and third wife. And he was always like, he's a man of principle. He said, I wouldn't want to disappoint my wife because they went through a lot when they got to get married, and my mum converting to Islam, and he didn't want to disappoint her, especially because there was a lot of accusations that Muslim men they're womanized and they just mistreat women kind of thing. So he was very conscious about that. So that was something that I always respected, but I wasn't ready to um,
Fully like
yeah,
live
but
it.
that was the standard in terms of how you should be as a man. In terms of you're supposed to provide not only financially but also emotionally as well. And you should also have a level of empathy. So it's not just thinking about, and also understanding that sometimes your culture can restrict you. So whilst he was proudly, and my mum was also proudly Nigerian, not everything in the Nigerian or the Yoruba culture they fully embrace, especially if it contradicts like Islamic principles about treating people with respect and things like that. So yeah, so that was my upbringing. I didn't fully, follow that mold, so to speak, that path. So, like I said, I also had some cousins who were and uncles who were, what would you call them? Well, the modern day term is maybe Yoruba demons. Yeah, it's like a player womanizer, and I aspired to that. And obviously, then watching back in the day films like Boomerang and How to Be a
Mm.
Player, so that was a version of masculinity that I prescribed to, and I
Yes.
indulged in for a period of time, but it wasn't fulfilling. And one of the things that, again, just remembering the things that my dad taught me is about your legacy and your reputation and your name. And if you're going to be mistreating, again, I'm not saying again if someone's having consensual relationship, that's up to them. But as men, most cases we know that a lot of the women, especially if you're playing around, they don't want to. They're not
Mm-hmm.
happy to be in that type of relationship. But I think as men, sometimes we lie to ourselves and we give the
Mm.
impression that it's consensual. She knows that I'm not committed, but really and truly, that most women want a deep, meaningful, most cases monogamous relationship. If you're not able to be forthcoming and open from the beginning, don't enter in that type of arrangement kind of thing. So that was something that from it wasn't like I'll be lying if I would say that it was from a religious perspective. That's why
Uh-huh.
it was more from the values that my dad instilled in me, like I said, from how he behaved and how he conducted himself. And then in my late teens to early 20s, then I kind of really wanted to start to learn more about the religion, because I'm saying I'm a Muslim, but I don't really know much
Mm.
about the religion itself. So that's what then sparked the fire in me to kind of learn a little bit about the religion. And growing up in the UK, very cosmopolitan city, you have Muslims from West Africa, from South Asia, from the Caribbean, and different interpretations, especially in terms of how they treat women. In some
Mm-hmm.
mosques, woman is not allowed to enter. In other mosques, which I grew up in, a Nigerian mosque, women can enter. There's no like really judgment in terms of men and women sitting in the same environment. So there was healthy interaction between the genders. You go to another mosque and it's like women are a source of shame and fitna. We need to keep them away. And so I was
Mm.
always wondering, is this from the religion? Is this a cultural interpretation? And like I said, because I'm a quite inquisitive and curious person, that's why I wanted to understand, okay, how did these attitudes develop? Because when I used to read about the early Muslim community, it was a healthy relationship between the genders. So
Yeah.
that's why I
Yeah.
just understand like what happened and why is it you have these different like interpretations that are entrenched in certain communities and more pronounced in some communities more than others. So that led me to going to Egypt for 3.5 years, where I studied Islamic law and in Arabic and Islamic history. And then when I came back, I just thought this might be interesting. Some of the stuff that I've researched and found to write and put in the form of a books, because whilst I do speak about religion and I'm passionate about religion, I don't see myself as a religious preacher or speaker.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
That wasn't what warmed me to the religion, not preachers. And one of the reasons, if I'm going to be completely honest with you, is because I saw more cases of mistreatment and womanizing amongst religious preachers and speakers than when I
Mm.
wasn't really. And that's why
Yeah.
I never understood that if we've got this beautiful religion that's teaching us to honor women and to treat women with respect, why is it not all, definitely not majority, but you have a number of so-called like religious preachers, speakers, and some scholars who are engaging in these like short-term relationships where they
Mm-hmm.
just marrying, divorcing, mistreating women, and then a lot of people are silent about it. And that's what I could never understood. And even my dad, he did speak to me about that as well many years ago, and that's why there was like a lack of not yeah, there's somewhat of a lack of respect of like, again, you can memorize the Quran, you can speak Arabic, but I often judge someone by their character and especially how they treat women or people that necessarily have less power than themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's yeah, so that's why I thought, okay, we could kind of put this in the form of a book and to kind of like educate people about what Islam as a religion actually teaches, as opposed to some of these cultural practices that are in some cases oppressing people, especially women.
No, I think that those are great points. And for the listeners, I do have some people who aren't Muslim who aren't familiar. So just to back it up, right? In Islam, polygyny is allowed, and a man can have up to four wives. And also, something, but there's provisions, or there's boundaries around it, right? Like they have to be cared for, they have to be treated equally, and so forth. And then also, you highlight something that I hear about in a lot of religions, like even Christian, like I just know people from all backgrounds, is people abusing power. And religion can sometimes be a perfect platform because people trust you. Like I was just talking to some colleagues the other day about something that happened with a priest who kind of misled us on some stuff. And they were like, I thought he was a father. I thought I could trust him. And I'm like, no, a lot of times people hide behind that because it's a form of instant trust. Like we all have that, like we need to build trust with people, but sometimes people hide behind religion because it's an instant form of trust. But it sounds like your father even like was giving you little gems about looking at people's actions, not their titles or their platform, so to speak.
Yes, correct. And again, it's something that even he still sometimes struggles with because he would say things like like there was a scandal that came out a couple of not more than a couple of years ago, but he was like, but this person is an imam, he's memorized the Quran, and it's that this disconnect that you can't believe what you mentioned about instant trust,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the communities I'm from. If someone has memorized the Quran or even speaks Arabic, people automatically assume that they are like the perfect human being.
Just, mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's not the case. And actually, when you read the classical text, when you read the Quran and the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he warned people about that. He didn't. They and um, a lot of the warnings are, or the verses are encouraging people to look out for people of character. It's not about the clothes that they wear. It's not about the size of their beard. It's not about where they've studied or how much they've memorized. It's about their character, their conduct. But I think oftentimes, as Muslims or in many other religious circles, people look at titles or
Mm-hmm.
it's like because someone's a priest, like you mentioned, or an imam, they automatically give that trust to that person when the religion doesn't actually teach that. It doesn't actually say that. The religion doesn't say because someone is a scholar or is an imam or the mimbar, automatically that means that you don't have to, you don't have to be wary of them in terms of if
Mm-hmm.
they're doing foul and things like that. So that's where I had to understand, okay, what does the religion actually teach as opposed to many people's assumptions of the religion. And there is a big, like I said, disconnect. But yeah, sorry, just in terms of for the benefit of the listeners who are not Muslim. So the religion of Islam, like you mentioned, polygamy is allowed and is permitted, but like you said, with certain conditions. And one of the things that I found quite challenging was that sometimes when people talk about the religion, they speak about the legality as opposed to the ethics and the morality of the religion.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes men ask me questions like, is it true that I don't need to ask permission from my wife to take a second wife? And I'm like, why would you even ask that question? You know that
Yeah.
the religion says you're not allowed to lie. You know the religion says you're not allowed to cheat and deceive someone. So how do you think you can take on another wife and like secretly, and you
Yeah.
think that's perfectly acceptable in Islam? So even having that question for me, that you haven't understand the core tenets and beliefs and teachings of Islam. So
It's like
that's
missing the
something.
spirit of the law,
Yeah,
right? Versus
yeah.
the letter of the law.
Yeah, so you have that as well. That like a lot of people, like I said, are more. They place a lot of emphasis on legality and like following the letter of the law, and they lose sight of the spirit of the law. And again, this is especially when one is reading maybe some historical text and not understanding the context of some statements that were written by maybe some scholars or maybe someone saying something in a different cultural context that might not apply in your modern day context. And also, if you don't have empathy and you're just more or less like a sociopath, then you just think, okay, this something works for me and this is something that I need
Mm-hmm.
to keep me upright. I'm going to do that, irrespective of the destruction that it's going to cause. And that's just something that I think sometimes as Muslims who are outwardly, I would say, very religious,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes lose sight of. And I intentionally say outwardly very religious because oftentimes when people think about someone who is religious from an Islamic perspective, they will think about how the person dresses and like again their beard or their hijab and things like that without thinking about the character because that
Mm-hmm.
was something people emphasize. So when you speak about someone being religious, what I think about is someone of very good character, someone who's
Yeah.
trustworthy, someone who's upright. So these are things that I think more people need to kind of be informed of or aware of. But yeah, that's a little. Sorry, think I went on a
No,
bit too much, but that's a little
no,
bit
I
about
think it's so important because I think it gets to like a lot of the debates out in the dating world and all the relationship content. People are talking about taking down the veil. There's a lot of misrepresentation. So people are like, if you want to play the field, cool, play the field. Just stop pretending that you don't want to. So I think it's like the same concept.
Yeah. And the double standard. So that's something that I never that one of the things that I never understood, but it's very prevalent in many, religious circles is, men are allowed to play their field, but if a woman is even just dating or just trying to find out, a potential spouse for her by herself, then the world is turned upside down. It's just the outrage is just it's just so one sided and it's quite
Mm-hmm.
hypocritical. And I've never
Mm-hmm.
really understood that as well. And again, it's where people will use the religion to justify these double standards. And this is something that I've never really understood. I've studied with people who are outside, as we call it. I don't know what the term is in the US, but
Uh-huh.
who are outside.
Uh-huh.
Now they've turned their life around. Okay, now they're married, and um, but if they were to hear someone doing what they were doing, especially if
To
it's a
their
woman
daughter, right?
or their daughter, it's just like, and I'm just thinking to myself, are you forgetting what you was like?
Yeah, you did that to somebody's daughter.
That to someone, yeah. So, but people,
Mm-hmm.
so that's something that I always have to even remind, like when we have our man caves or our groups amongst men, we have those kind of discussions where sometimes we forget ourselves what we were like.
Yeah, yeah,
And yeah, it's just kind of reminding ourselves, and everyone's path is, to God or whatever they believe is different. And sometimes I think again, when you're have introspection, when you have time to think for yourself and realize actually being harsh as well, generally that's not really the path to that's going
yeah.
to warm to people. But having a level of understanding and just being having a level of humility as well. But sometimes amongst men, that is seen as a effeminate trait or
Well,
feminine
okay,
trait.
tell us what is said in these man caves. Like, what
Okay,
do men talk about when women aren't around?
okay,
Because women want to know, and I think you made a good point. Women will always look for validation from a man. Like, there's certain things that I've said about just male female dynamics and your power as a woman and your femininity. And then once someone hears it from a man in their life, they're like, oh, okay, yes, I agree with you now. So tell us what goes on and what is said. What are men talking about behind closed doors?
okay. Some of the things, what are meant to say? Where can I? Um, a lot of men will joke about maybe like for example, this is one recent one about taking a second or third wife, like about polygamy. And I said to a couple of guys that was in the group, I said, I don't really joke about it publicly, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't think we should joke about that, especially in the presence of women. And one of the guys said, "Why not?" And I said, "Okay, that's like, would you like it if you heard women or your wife complaining or joking that you don't satisfy in the bedroom, and then you're small, you're relatively small endowed or something like that?" And then he was horrified. He said, "How can you say that?" And I said, "I intentionally said that because I know that will hit a nerve."
Mm-hmm.
Likewise, when you're talking about, oh, I might take a second wife or things like the anxiety that you can cause, not only to your wife if she's in the audience, but other women, it's like, why would you want a woman who's married to be living in a constant fear? Like, because
Mm-hmm.
I might do something wrong, or because, or like when people use hadiths about, angels cursing the wife. I'm just thinking those type of like that type of language and that rhetoric. I'm always wondering what is your end goal? Why would you
Mm-hmm.
use that such language? Or and again, I think sometimes some men are unaware of it because what happens is amongst ourselves, someone might make a joke and someone will laugh, another person will laugh, and you see no harm, no foul. And again, amongst someone might say that we shouldn't have those conversations anyway. But I'll be honest, we are going to have that conversation, and we
Okay.
still
Uh-huh.
will continue. But it's really a case of, especially if you're having it in a public platform or in front of women, or no one's checking anyone in those male only audiences. I think that's a problem. So that's one. This is
Yeah.
the lack of empathy. The second is, yes. What's another thing that someone
You're
used to
like,
me?
am I gonna say
There's
it
so
or
many, yeah. There's so many, and that's the thing. You can't come across as a like always teaching. So yeah, sometimes
uh-huh.
you have to like, buy into the ignorance and just like
Mm-hmm.
um
Yeah.
for them to feel comfortable and safe to kind of open up to you as well. But there is also like this idea that women, what this is what someone actually said, women just complain a lot and they
Mm.
don't know the difference between nagging and complaining and communicating. And he was saying that that's what he was saying to his partner. And I said, rather than using the word nagging, she nags and complains. Why don't you just say there's a difference between communicating and communicating effectively. So maybe
Uh-huh.
the way she was communicating with you, what you call as nagging, it wasn't hitting the point, it wasn't resonating. So you can just explain, no, in order to communicate effectively, this is how you need to, maybe only need to tell me once on certain occasions, such and such. So it's even like the choice of words that I think as a lot of men we're not really kind of cognizant of, because
Mhm.
we sometimes think of women or treat them how we treat other men. And I'm like, you're having relationships with a woman. Why would you want to
Like,
speak to her?
bro, like kind of
Oh
just
yeah,
uh-huh.
yeah. And I think that comes down to a number of men not having healthy relationships with women that they're not romantically involved in, because
Yeah.
they're not able to read the room. So it's very common that men will even, it's now common for a number of men to refer to the other half as bro. And
Mhm.
well, for me, that's wild. I mean, maybe I'm showing my age, but
When I
it's
hear
just not.
my kids, I'm like, "Girl, you are not a bro." Uh-uh.
Yeah, so it's things like that. It's also a lot of men are also unaware,
Mhm.
especially a number of the issues that, especially in the last couple of weeks, there's been a number of public reports of public figures, black men who've been accused of sexual assault and things like that. And when that's come into like
Mhm.
the WhatsApp group, the first response for most of the men is he's innocent. And
Mhm.
when the question is posed to them, why do you think that this person is lying? This not this woman, multiple women are lying. The responses are, oh, because he's got money. Why would he need to force himself on a woman? And
So
this
they don't
idea that if you've got
understand
money,
power dynamics and how that works.
and
Mhm.
because a lot of men are obsessed with money, they assume
Mhm.
that all women are obsessed with money.
Mhm.
And because a number of men will literally, some cases, do anything for money, they think that's the case for women. And because men are attracted to money, they always think that, oh, and it's just having those honest conversations, or just think. And when some of these public figures has come to light, and you have numerous accusations where people realize, okay, this must be true,
Yeah.
then it's a case of, okay, maybe that might be the exception. Oh, that's the
Mhm.
exception, and even that is quite problematic, because the first instance for a lot of men is that you believe the man and you think, okay, the woman is lying, even if it's multiple women, or it's a conspiracy to bring the black man down, kind of thing. And
Yeah.
it's something which, even if you bring out statistics, and it's something which I think you can speak better to this than I can, being a psychologist. What was it? Something I read. It was, they were talking
Like,
about confirmation bias and
yeah.
anchoring bias, or anchoring
Mhm.
belief, in this idea that if you've got an assumption that something is the case, that women, if you believe that women often lie
Manipulate
about,
men or lie. Uh-huh.
manipulate, all of you will find out evidence and information and studies or podcasts that support that belief. And
Yes.
if you're hearing evidence contrary of that, even if it's from so many different sources, you're hearing testimonies from so many different women and research, you'll ignore that, because it goes against your confirmation, your original belief. So that's
Yeah.
something, and that I've noticed, and that's something that is quite difficult for men to come out of, unless, unfortunately, it happens to someone that they know of.
Yeah.
Then it's
Someone they care about.
then
Mhm.
care about. And then also that's quite problematic, because are you waiting for you to have a daughter, or something, God forbid, happens to a female relative, and then you now think, okay, I need to protect women. But even in that, is it that you're thinking about protecting women, or you're protecting those who are connected to you?
Yeah, yeah. It's like when
That's what,
rappers, a lot of them were calling women bees and hoes, and then when they had daughters, it was like all of a sudden, and it's like, well, your music affected us. Like we had to hear those horrible things, but now that you had a daughter, it's a different story. So
yeah.
yeah, I think it's so
And then
personal.
yeah, and then it's really a case of, is it women that you want to protect, or you want to protect yourself? Because now that you have a
Mm,
daughter, you don't want to be offended. You don't
yeah.
want to. So it's like, because I have a daughter, and obviously my daughter's connected to me, that's why she can't be called.
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand what I mean? So
Yeah,
that,
it's still like an
yeah,
extension of you that
yeah,
you're
yeah,
you're protecting your
yeah.
reputation, your honor,
Hmm.
yourself as a father. Yeah. Yeah.
And another thing I get quite a bit is, oh, how could you do all of these? This is directed to me.
Uh-huh.
I'll get a number of my friends will ask me, how can you do all of these podcasts, or these workshops with the beautiful women, and like not want to sleep with all of them? And I'm like, I'm not an animal. I'm in my 40s as well. So a lot of men, and these are men that are
Yeah.
like in their 30s, 40s,
So these aren't
some married,
kids, not
divorced. These
teenagers.
aren't children, no,
Yeah.
nah. It's and I think because a lot of men have bought into this idea that they can't control themselves,
Yeah.
especially around the woman that they desire. It's like I won't. It's like they can't imagine a man if he's in that position. He either must be doing it to sleep with multiple women because
Yeah.
otherwise,
Yeah.
impossible. And it's just like, yes, you can find a woman attractive. I'm not blind, of course, but
Yeah.
you can't let your small head control your big head kind of
Yeah.
thing. But I think a number of men, because maybe they haven't been around again, and I'm saying intentionally, they haven't had many relationships that are non-romantic with women. They aren't able to navigate normal, healthy relationships with women because if your only relationships you've had with women has just been either romantic or with the idea to hopefully be romantically involved, that's the only way you're going to see a woman, unless obviously she's a member
Yeah.
of your family. So I've guys will say that why would I want to talk to a woman other than like my wife? Like why?
Mm.
But then it's like as if there's nothing that a woman can give you any insights
Yeah.
apart from, raising your children and fulfilling your desires again. So I think that's also quite problematic. And then people will use the religion to kind of justify this kind of mindset with the whole idea of women being a fitna and a source of temptation, and that's why we need to be careful of them. And it's just quite, and a lot of it, to be honest, is performative. There is a lot of
Yeah.
performative piety
It's
because
more impressing. And that's why people say it's like an immature masculinity where some women will say men are more in love with other men than they are women because you're trying to impress each other with these tall tales and, facades.
yes, I'm glad you said that because I recently came back from Northern Nigeria and we had a
Mm,
presentation. I had a presentation just for men, and one of the questions that a number of their wives asked that wanted us to discuss in this panel discussion, men only group, was about emotional intimacy and men's
mm.
understanding of intimacy. Now, Northern Nigeria culturally is very different to the culture I'm from. I'm from Southeast Nigeria, where
Okay.
Yoruba are a bit more relaxed in terms of male-female relationships, whereas in Northern Nigeria is more
Is that like the Hausa
stoic.
area
Yes,
or
correct.
okay.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
they're more stoic, and the men are there's the relationships is kind of seen as more as men are the financial providers, women are
Mm.
there to just serve them the men, and there isn't really much you can say companionship or friendship between even like husband and wife, and that's kind of seen as the model and the standard. So when we were speaking about intimacy, and I was using the Angelica Lindsay Ali's intimacy model, where she's got the 5 types of authentic intimacy. So I was breaking it down and just explaining each and every one of them. And what I was saying was that because one of the questions that one of their wives asked, which I read out
Mm.
and wanted to explain, is that men lack intimacy, emotional
Mm.
intimacy. And I pushed back on that and I said, I think that we have the capacity to be emotionally intimate, and a lot of us are intimate in terms of emotionally, but like you mentioned, with other men. So
Yeah.
we can be vulnerable, we can open up, we can feel safe around other men, but because of the idea of masculinity that a lot of them subscribe to, they can't have that relationship with a woman, even their wife.
Yeah.
So it's not that
Yeah.
they can't emote, they can emote, but they feel that the people that they can be emotionally vulnerable with and open up to about their insecurities, their joys, their fears is with their male friends. And the idea for a number of them to have that relationship with a woman is seen as emasculating,
Yeah,
which is
yeah. Just the
it's,
very idea. I'm glad you said that, right? Because you hear this term a lot where women are told you're emasculating men, but sometimes they're fighting against it's an idea. It's not anything that any one woman has done. It's the idea of what it means to be emotionally intimate that some men and some women, I like to talk a lot on my platform to women, almost like how you talk to men. I like to talk to women about what is our role in the relationship dynamic. And I do firmly believe that when we get cut off from our feminine energy, our feminine strengths, which include the nurturance and really emotional awareness and comfort within ourselves, like that actually draws the man that you're married to or in relationship with to a place of safety where he can be more emotionally intimate. But I laughed when you said that about the guy saying that the nagging, because I tell women like nagging is not the route to emotional intimacy. It
Mm.
creates like a mother son dynamic or a more familiar brother, big sister or little sister. And it's hard for because it's really hard what I've observed, even just as a therapist, having working with a lot of male clients, for men to feel safe enough or feel like give themselves permission to feel safe enough with a woman to be emotionally intimate. But many desire it. Many desire it. And then if they understood, like, women we're so sensitive. We're sensitive creatures to where that's why it's easy for us sometimes to get duped. Like, you roll out the red carpet for us, we're there. But then you kind of like shut down from, like, the biggest thing for a woman is when you are like emotionally blank and shut down is very triggering. And what I've noticed is that for men, a tone that's kind of has disrespect in it is very triggering. So it's like we're thieves in the night crossing each other. We're not understanding what we're doing to like cut off intimacy and what we can do to draw it in. And it sounds like men are just more comfortable with, like, women, we're like that too, but we tend to also seek out a lot of intimacy, like you said in that workshop, with our men. But it's like men, it sounds like they stay where they know it's going to be safe
Yes.
to be open and vulnerable.
Yes, and again, I just think that it's because, and there are a number of men who do want to connect emotionally
Hmm.
with their wives and other women, but they don't know how, or they haven't seen models of how to do it.
Yeah.
So again, especially if you find in many circles that it's just men speaking amongst themselves, women is speaking amongst themselves, you're not going to learn, because generally, if you're having conversations like we're having with men and women talking to each other and with each other, there you will learn different communication styles,
Hmm.
and then
Hmm.
you'll realize, okay, same way when someone generally speaking to someone of older generation or their parents, they'll communicate differently compared to their contemporaries, compared to if they're maybe teaching someone of a younger generation. So you're still the same person. You're not. I don't know if it's called code switch, it might be, but
Yeah.
you're just knowing how to communicate and how to be a bit flexible in terms of your delivery, so it's receptive. That's the most important thing. But I think oftentimes men do not see, and women sometimes probably do not see those healthy conversations between men and women. So you
Yeah.
have the arguments and the debates, which is quite adversary, but you don't have those complementary conversations where you can learn, without realizing by osmosis you'll be learning different ways of communicating and
Yeah.
understanding. Because
Yeah.
a lot of men were oblivious, because for many men, especially when, like, we had a conversation about like the love languages, and a lot of the guys were like, if I'm providing, I'm doing all of this for my
What
wife.
other language is there, right?
Yeah,
It's like,
what can she be? What can she complain about? What she should be
hmm.
grateful? And it might be a case of, even one brother was saying that, he woke up in the middle of the night because his wife had somewhere to go to. So he went, and it's like he said, from his house to the petrol station, it's about a couple of miles. He woke up, took the car because he remembered. He took the car, filled up her tank, and then brought it back, so that's when she wakes up and she's going to wherever she needs to go to, she doesn't need to worry about getting petrol because there's a lot of traffic, so she can making her life easier. But it was like, and she doesn't appreciate me, she doesn't know that. And I just said to
Mm.
him, did you tell her that? He's like, no. But it's like, so he just assumes
Yeah.
that she,
Yeah.
so a lot of things is down to a lack of communication, I would say,
Yeah.
and mutual understanding, because I do believe that in most cases men do want to um understand and please their wives, partners, what have you, and vice versa. But because in our own echo chambers, sometimes our own man caves or woman caves, we're just
Yeah.
hearing the woman's perspective, the man's perspective. Oftentimes, you don't realize that we're just understanding things differently, and sometimes you just need maybe an intermediary. And that's why now
Hmm.
I imagine you're having a lot of, like, with the work that you're doing as a therapist,
Yeah.
you have couples coming together. They just need someone in the middle just to kind of explain,
To
that they're both
translate, yeah.
translate.
And a lot of
Yeah.
times the husband will feel, he'll be like, I didn't think I would feel this comfortable in these sessions with you because I thought you were going to take her side. And it's like, actually, I'm just translating. Like, you're trying to say something, and I'm restating it so she can understand. And so, and vice versa. And it's like just modeling and teaching people how to say that. It's funny when you say that because I'm like, okay, whenever I have to travel, my husband does not let me take Uber. He doesn't care if it's 1 in the morning, two, whatever time the flight is. He's like, no, I'm going to drive you. And, from a man's, I learned that from a man's perspective, that is so, like, we might say, oh, well, I could have just took Uber, or you didn't have to drive me, but like, or you didn't have to get that gas. She might say, I could have just gotten it. But it is such, like, men are such problem solvers that that action is the same as us. And like sometimes as women, we get hurt when we're not recognized. Like, if we put our love into making a meal, or we put so much into ourselves to look beautiful and all of these things, like, it's easy to not do it. So when we do it, it's like we want to be valued. Just like he felt like, okay, I didn't have to wake up at 2 in the morning, but I really wanted to do it. So maybe the answer is, like you said, like, did you tell the person, I did this because I really wanted to make you happy, I value you, or, like, we're assuming that people understand our intentions, and that they think that they know, that they should automatically, that our way of expressing love should be their way of receiving it. So
Mhm.
it's like she probably was like, okay, cool, thanks. But I don't know what he wanted. But I see that a lot with women where it's like, okay, well, he was happy. Like, what did you want him to do? But yeah, we seem to be perpetually dissatisfied with how the other is showing appreciation.
Yeah, and just a final thing, because I know from the secrets of the man cave or the WhatsApp groups,
Yeah.
another thing that a number of men say is oh, like, either talking about these types of subjects is either
Uh-huh.
pandering to women or it's like a
Okay.
Western of masculinity.
Uh-huh.
So that's why I intentionally, because I've obviously got Muslim friends and non-Muslim friends who are primarily black. I'll present, especially when I'm speaking to Muslims, the Prophet
Mm-hmm.
Muhammad, peace be upon him, as an example, as a role model. And then when I'm speaking to my predominantly black friends who are not Muslim, I'll give examples of different examples of masculinity
Mm-hmm.
from different African cultures that were in line with what women are saying nowadays. So this idea that across the African continent, that across African cultures, that this idea that the man is just, the provider, the one who just provides financially, but is not emotionally available, and this, that, and the other. That that's not the case. You have other cultures that teach men to be obviously there for their wives emotionally as well, and to try to be in tune with her needs. So that's why, like I said, because my two main audiences arguably are Muslims and black people, I try to present models that they can, that if they're not aware of, that they can kind of realize or aspire to be like, okay, this is a
Mm-hmm.
different form of masculinity that I'm not necessarily familiar with. So it's not just, oh, this is coming from the West or Western feminism, because
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, for whatever reason, a number of men, both Muslim and those who are not religious, when you mention feminism, it's just like, I
It's
don't know
like,
why, but I'm just like, I don't know. It's just like, honestly, it's like the Antichrist or the devil incarnate. I'm like, what's so I'm also trying to understand, why have you got such an issue like with feminism, as if you believe that all feminists want the destruction of men and want us to be not only incarcerated, but one guy said, yeah, feminist. He said, I can never marry a feminist because I don't. What did he say? I don't negotiate with terrorists. And
what?
secondly, a feminist, every feminist believes that men should be castrated. And I'm like, where
Oh
did you
my
get this from?
gosh.
Yeah, yeah. So there
It's,
is this. You hear this rhetoric a lot, like
yeah.
the like feminism is equated to like all of the ills of the world, in both a
Yeah.
lot of traditional masculine, these like masculine or these male orientated podcasts, or whether it's the red pill, men going their own way, or even traditional religious circles, you hear the same kind of rhetoric about feminism. And that's why, if I'm speaking to women, I might just say that even if you're a feminist or inclined to feminism, maybe you don't necessarily need to say feminist or feminism. Just
Uh-huh.
put forth your arguments so people can hear your arguments, because
Yeah.
for whatever
Cuz the
reason, a lot of
title is
men,
going to like put
yes,
people, certain
straight
people
away,
off.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yes, straight
I love
away,
that
and
approach though, because like a lot of times we don't recognize the power of repackaging something. My biggest gripe with some people is like the whole I'm gonna tell it like it is. And it's like, well, you don't always you can tell it in a way that the other person can hear it. Doesn't always have to be your version that is gonna like shut it off. So I think that's a perfect example. Like, okay, you might espouse like values of gender equality, but you don't have to put that title on it because he's gonna like right now it's just the branding of feminism has in all circles has kind of just gone down. So people hear it and they don't even, most people are uninformed, so they haven't read anything, they don't know anything about the history even in different parts of the world. Oh, what did he say? I don't negotiate with terrorists. Okay.
I don't negotiate terrorists here.
That is so that right there. Is he married?
He is actually
Good.
married, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. And he
But again,
probably
so that's
doesn't
why
know
he
what
has
yet.
he has his idea. He wants. I mean, he and even he was talking about taking a second wife, but he wants to go to back home and
Mm-hmm.
to get a submissive. And this is actually something that I learned when I was in northern Nigeria. Um, a number of men, one brother told me that a number of men, they want women who are naive about their
Mm-hmm.
rights. And I was like, what do you mean by that? He said they want women who are, not all, but a number of men want women who are naive so that they can basically be the lord over them. And if they
Yeah.
need to exploit them, so even that mentality, he said it's not everyone, but unfortunately that's quite prevalent amongst a number of men. So if a woman is coming across as knowing her rights or speaking about feminism and all the rest of it, it's going to feel like, okay, this is not a good woman, or this is not a good wife material, so to speak.
Yeah.
So that's why they want a woman who's naive. And again, I think that's problematic in and of itself. And I will give examples again because they're Muslim of Islamic models in early Muslim community to kind of refute that. Because with a lot of men, because it's not only what you say, but who the person is saying it. That's when they'll listen. So
Mm-hmm.
again, it will be like if I'm giving examples of people that they respect, whether it's like the Prophet or some Muslim scholars,
Companions. Uh-huh.
then they're likely to listen. Whereas if it's just a content, what I'm saying in and of itself, sometimes that's kind of not enough. So that's why, again, just thinking about what you said about some women who would just be like, I'm just going to say what I'm going to say, whether people want to hear me or not. If I think if you're speaking, if you're a speaker, an educator, or like, you need to think about, is my message going to be receptive?
Mm-hmm.
And you want to try and package it in a way that that it's going to be receptive, and if they want to act upon it, listen to it, it's up to them, but at least you want to communicate in a way where it's receptive and the person understands what you're getting at, your point you're trying to put across, and then they can decide what they want to do with that information. But if you know that there's going to be certain, like, maybe trigger words
Yeah.
that there's going to
You're
make the
looking for
person shut
marriage and
down.
you're like, I'm a
Yeah, so like now with a lot of the guy, like this whole obsession with a traditional woman. So this
mm-hmm.
might even go into the idea of what it means to be a traditional woman, or their ideas of femininity. And it's like a woman who is completely submissive, doesn't answer back. And it's like a lot of these ideas is, for me, it's not realistic, but maybe I'm speaking from my own perspective because that's not something that I've ever been attracted to.
Mm-hmm.
But for some men, that's what they like because maybe they are not secure with themselves or what they've achieved in life, so
Yeah.
they don't want
Yeah.
any woman to challenge them. So, but what is unfortunate is people will use maybe their preferences and try and impose it upon everyone, or
Make
say
it a
this is the
global
ideal
standard. Yeah.
global,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So that's also, it's trying to challenge that, because again, especially when people attach religion to it, it's extremely problematic. Or when people try to attach, like, this is the African culture or Black culture,
Mm-hmm.
or this is traditionally what it meant to be a woman, and then but then when you peel back the curtain, you realize, is that the case for all cultures? Is that the case for all interpretations of the religion, or is that just the interpretation you chose and now you want to
Yeah.
superimpose that upon? And I think a lot of people are not aware of that. That a lot of their views, we're all products of our environment and our largely our upbringing. But oftentimes we use our own biases or own preferences, and we think that's the norm, or that should be the standard for everyone. And again, I
Yeah.
just think that's where, you know, an injustice
Well,
to
look at
people.
how you just noticed or noted the difference from the southern region of Nigeria to the northern. So that's one country. So for us to think
Yeah.
that like across the whole Muslim world or the whole world, there's just this one standard. And I feel like people, men and women, need to learn to create like marriage. One of the benefits is it should be a sweet environment, right? Like you're not getting married to be fighting and like doing all the things that you do with people outside the world. So I think the communication is so key, because it's like if I'm going to be communicate sweetly and carefully with anybody, I would hope it would be my husband, versus like some of us put more effort into communicating and being kind and thoughtful and all that stuff to other people outside of our marriage. And then when it comes to the spouse, it's like they get the leftovers, like either the cold shoulder or the nagging or whatever it is, that I'm not going to engage with you part. And it's like, it's supposed to be the opposite. Like, why aren't we bringing the sweet, the male female dynamic? Because I truly believe, and I'm sure it's not all men, but like, well, you tell me, what do you think, what do men, so we heard there's this idea for some of the submissive, quote unquote traditional, but like in the heart of heart, like what do you think, because men are drawn to women. Sex is part of it, but like what are the feminine qualities as well, that or the what is it about femininity that draws men? And it, like sex, I'm sure is one, but like what are the different aspects?
I would say loyalty.
Mhm.
Loyalty and faithfulness is intertwined, but it's somewhat slightly different. Um, Gentleness, gracefulness, nurturing, and I'm speaking about femininity specifically for the woman herself because I don't want to. Of course, there are many women, of course, who are going to be mothers, but I want to think about, or how I'm talking about femininity is how men value femininity in a woman for her herself, not for her as a mother of their child. Because oftentimes, what you find is that when men, and again, it's beautiful for men to praise and value their wives or their partners for being the mothers of their children, but they're more than that. And that's why I'm
Yeah.
thinking about femininity for her herself, not
Mhm.
because of their child, because that's still you value her because she's protecting or looking after someone that's connected to you, your child.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in terms of femininity themselves, and the love aspect, I think one of the issues that, if I'm going to be honest with a number of men, myself included, is that in our friendship groups, we do not speak about marriage in a positive light.
It's a
So
cage.
it's
What
not
did
really.
somebody say? I heard the golden cage. Like you're
It's
locked.
like it's a really bad thing because even if you're in a very good and healthy marriage and you love your
Mhm.
wife and it's your safe space and you can open up and be vulnerable with her, you won't share that with your male friends.
Mhm.
And that's in a in some cases it's to protect because you've
Uh-huh.
got a good thing going. You don't need to. It's like you don't need to share it with the world, like in
Invite, like, uh-huh.
right. You don't need to do that. And a lot of the male spaces, we like to banter a lot, and we like to, even if we're speaking about serious topics, and you don't want to necessarily bring your, like, what's generally considered amongst male spaces, whether Muslim, non-Muslim, religious, irreligious, your significant other and your children out of bounds.
Uh-huh.
They're two things you don't, everything else you can laugh and joke about. And if it's your significant other, whether it's your wife, your long term partner, generally as men, that's seen as off limits. Now, the problem with that is the women that men will talk about are the women that they may be casually dating, women that they're not necessarily serious with. But
Mhm.
then some men who haven't got that safe space, that haven't got that real relationship with, like their wife, for example, they will think that that's not possible. So there
Mhm.
are a number of men who haven't experienced, like, you can call it true love or really a connection with a woman. They don't think it's possible because they've never experienced it.
Yeah.
And the men that they come across, they just speak about
The
just playing around
casual thing. Uh-huh.
casual stuff. So that's why for a lot of men, if they haven't seen it or experienced it themselves, a lot of men don't think it exists. Like a lot of men, like this whole idea that as long as you get the money, you get the woman. It doesn't matter if she comes and goes because women are irreplaceable. But if you have a woman that's down for you and you're down for her, you know that you can't replace her and you wouldn't want to
Yeah.
replace her.
Yeah.
And that's something that you can't put in words. But again, I just think that because as men, we generally don't talk about that, and for
Mm-hmm.
good reason. Like I said, you don't want
It's like a
to. It's
protection
like
in a way. Uh-huh.
yeah, it's a type of protection. The same way men generally are less likely to talk about their relationships on social media compared to women. And I'm
Yeah.
not, and the reasons for it, because women will support it and be very happy to see like a loving couple and things like that. Whereas with men, even if you look at the comments, men won't say anything. Even if they're happy for you, they're not gonna, because
Yeah.
it's like you're happy for, you're not going to, you might be careful. If I like the comment, if I say something, I don't want him to think that I'm looking at his woman a certain way. So
Yeah.
it's best just
Yeah.
to avoid keeping limits.
Just
Whereas with
ignore
women,
it, right? Uh-huh.
yeah, just ignore it. But the problem with that is that those many who have not experienced or have been exposed to those healthy, loving relationships, a number of men will think that it doesn't exist. That's why
Yeah.
you find a
Yeah.
number of men with more emphasis and pride in being a good father
Mm-hmm.
and a loyal friend than being a good husband.
Good
If
husband.
you
Yeah.
notice, most people will
Yeah.
talk about being a father, even a good son. They'll talk about their mother and how much they what they'll do for their mum and things like that. They'll talk about even being a loyal friend and this whole idea of
Uh-huh.
snitching. But in terms of being a good and loyal husband, how many men openly talk about that?
Yeah.
Because it's
Yeah.
not
They're called
value.
simps.
Exactly, that's also the
Yeah.
problem. Yeah, so
Like
you see
anyone
amongst
that you
men,
see in the media that's like, oh, he's a simp, he's this. Yeah.
yeah,
Wow. That is so deep because the same thing happens with women. I think women, when we get together, will either talk about like the problems that they're having in their relationship. So it's like a vent session. And then that gives the impression that relationships are just about trouble, heartbreak. Like I think both men and women are so, they're in a negative bubble, and they it's reinforced, it's confirmed, and so then they get hopeless. And like I can't tell you the number of women that are like, oh, it's useless, men don't want marriage, I don't want marriage, it's all about the bag, like all of these terminologies. But in reality, it's because we get in a bubble. Yeah, women, now that you're talking, women will talk about relationship problems, issues they're having. They might talk a little bit like when they first meet somebody, like, oh, their happiness, but it kind of quickly turns to almost like fear. When is he going to betray me? He's going to cheat on me. Like it turns negative. So I'm just like in my mind, just going over the fact, because I know the power of a negative thought pattern. And I'll sit and tell my clients, like, no, you're catastrophizing, meaning you're taking something small and making it huge, or you're jumping to conclusions, or like all of these things that we do in our minds. But just to hear how it plays out is so fascinating. Like, well, one, I think it's good for women to hear that a lot of times men, it's a protectiveness. Like the thing that they value the most, they're not going to bring out into the lion's den and like show all the men. They're just going to
yeah,
keep quiet
exactly,
about it and keep it to themselves.
yeah, and that's something that a number of women that I've spoken to have found it very difficult to understand. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, if he values me, why doesn't he post me on his Facebook or he's, and it's like that's something. And again, so that's also understanding the way a lot of men think, and a lot of the men who are in good, healthy relationships, they will speak one to one with a number of men that like this is
Mhm.
where you need to be, this is what you need to aspire to. But when you're amongst a number of men, whether it's in WhatsApp or in person, you wouldn't say that because you get laughed at. You be called a simp. So you just play to the crowd. But in
Mhm.
reality, a lot. But but yeah. So in reality, yeah. So it's, like what you're saying about the negative thought, yeah, I'm just thinking about that as well because there is a lot of. It's just unfortunate because I'm thinking, where would you go if you haven't seen it or experienced it as a man? Because what you will see generally, again, I'm just thinking online or even in male groups, it's just not something that men won't talk about in a positive light. Even those who may be in that situation
Yeah.
and they're happy,
Yeah.
they wouldn't talk about, or like men who may, like even when brothers will ask about like stepping out on their wife or taking another wife, and I'm just like, if you realize, you think about what you're going to lose. Even if you take another, your marriage is not going to be the same.
Mm-hmm.
When you think
Mm-hmm.
about it like that, it's like, okay, it's not worth it.
Yeah.
You don't need to tell them, oh, it's haram or this, that, and this. Like, if you just think about the relationship that you've got, it's not going to be the same, and the peace and all of the things that you're enjoying, it's not going to
Yeah.
be the same. Just think about that. You're going to lose it. Are you willing to lose that for 30 seconds or having many minutes for them for guys to pat you on
Yeah.
the back and then it's not worth it. And then when men gets that realization, they realize it's not worth it. But
Yeah.
because a lot of men will encourage them, like encourage bad behavior, and if you're quite weak in terms of character wise, you just follow what everyone is doing, you just
Yeah.
go and
Well, I was
you know.
talking. It's like a teenager. Like I was talking to one of my daughter's friends about peer pressure. She's a little bit older, and she's like, I said, "Tell me about what it's like as a teenager." And she's like, "Peer pressure. Your brain just wants it to stop. Like you're just people are just like do this or they're teasing you or whatever. Your brain literally wants it to stop, so you give in." And I'm imagining like with men, like we desire nobody wants to be rejected or ejected from the group, from the tribe, so to speak. So like men, that's how it just the negative feedback loop happens, because nobody wants to put themselves out there to be like the simp or whatever. But I am imagining, I'm just listening to how you're talking about it. I'm imagining that the men you're in circles with really value your perspective, because first of all, they know you're not judging them as an outsider. You're one of them. But then they probably everyone, I believe, is looking for a positive, like you get a lot of backlash. Like if I say something positive about men, it's like I'm going to get a lot of backlash because I'm supposed to just be bashing men and all this stuff. But actually, I think people are really craving that deep down inside. Like there is a man who's craving to know, wait, there's a way to connect with a woman and please her and I get pleasure and she falls in and she really loves me. Like I'm sure that there are people, they just probably, like you said, aren't going to write about it in your Instagram comments. It's usually us women that are commenting on your stuff, right?
Yeah, so with my French, and I've got other men who and honest feedback. I think, but I think one of the things that I think I try that I'm in groups with is that we don't judge each other, especially instantly. Even if we know someone is doing something wrong, because we let them to tell their story, let them talk about how they're feeling. But then how we will kind of maybe try and advise them is just think about the consequences, as opposed to like saying what you're doing is wrong, you're a bad person, blah blah blah. Because oftentimes they kind of know it, so it's just a case of presenting. Okay, if you continue doing this, these are the repercussions, these are the consequences.
All right, everyone, that was part one of my interview with Habeeb Akande. We had such a great conversation. It extended so long, so I cut this into two parts. The follow up episode will be out real soon. I hope you really enjoyed this. And in the meantime, if you have any gems that you want to just go back and listen to again, review this episode, and part two will be coming out soon. Take care.